warunkach granicznej widoczności, nie narażając załogi. Czołg może operować w terenie zatrutym, skażonym.
Essentially, I think Poland, and we've all recognised that now for a while, the war in Ukraine has turned very much into a kind of drone war. Russia was in the same position as many other countries at the beginning. It was a relative amateur in it, but it took experience and took a design from the Iranians. And it's been it's now manufactured itself, and it has now literally turned into a kind of drone war. In July, over 8,000 drones were fired at Ukraine. Now, Poland, after the incursion last week, has recognised that it needs to do something about its defence. It's also in a slightly more protected position. So I think it's a very logical combination of Ukrainian experience, Polish expertise, and a certain amount of Polish ability to stand back from the fight, if you like, to try and put together a sort of joint Ukrainian-Polish defence group. What will be very interesting is what the reaction of the Russians will be to that. They might see that as direct involvement of Poland in the war in Ukraine. But we should not underestimate the sort of ingenuity and innovation and creativity that the Ukrainians have used and be able to demonstrate in terms of fighting the war. And that's making us rethink our warfare and our building for the future as well. So the Poles are very sensitive to Russian behaviours, and they see the next logical step for Russia, having attacked Ukraine, is to do something to Poland itself. So that's why they're defending themselves, and that's why, as you rightly point out, they have rearmed to a much greater extent than we have done. What we will see is more of this kind of grey zone, hybrid zone warfare. The Russians are masters in this, and Putin, remember, is a KGB man. He's a Chekist, and we've seen already we've seen sabotage, we've seen fires, we've seen attempted assassination attempts, and what I suspect will happen immediately will be a turning up of the rheostat on such attacks. So what we can expect to see is much more of the sort of cyber attacks, interference with radio signals, interference even with the navigation instruments of civilian aircraft in Poland as a response from there. The Russians threatened the whole time. They've just threatened Japan extraordinarily. You'd think they've got enough on their plate with what's going on in Western Europe, but they literally just threatened Japan. And this is a direct threat from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs over something which the Japanese have done. And then they said to them quite bluntly, expect asymmetric retaliation. I mean, that is the language that Russia uses the whole time. It doesn't seem to have any other sort of level of diplomatic subtlety. Its only language is the language of threats. So they're threatening Japan at the same time as they are threatening Western Europe as well. It's quite extraordinary what they're doing.
Czołg może operować w terenie zatrutym, skażonym i napromieniowanym.
Fast forward to where we are now in 2025, countries like Poland are looking at that and going, do you know what? The one thing that would have stopped Russia in its tracks if in 2022, if not in 2014, is if we had nuclear weapons. And so they're looking to see where they can acquire them for themselves. And the thing to stress is that there have always been situations whereby the Americans would supply tactical nuclear weapons to its allies, and Poland was indeed one of those countries, but those countries wouldn't hold the weapons themselves. What Poland is investigating, I think it's probably fair to say investigate at the moment, is whether it shows its own independent nuclear deterrent. In other words, weapons under its control and not under the control of the Americans, particularly given the slight inconsistency and lack of coherence in the way in which America now treats Europe. But it basically stresses the importance of Greenland, if you like, in the strategic future. And I think the Danes have recognised, have had to recognise, that while this huge island, which is is tens the time the size of Denmark itself, but it has an absolutely tiny population, nonetheless has huge strategic significance. If you now consider the kind of the competition, particularly with potentially ice-free seas in the Arctic, the competition, the strategic competition, has now moved to what they call the High North. And it is possible for Russian forces to move quite swiftly during the summer period across the Arctic, not necessarily directly across, but actually using the ice-free routes, which will now appear to be a common feature of all summers in the Arctic, along with, and they've got a very significant fleet of icebreakers, which they can use all the year round. So the competition is there. And if you look at the map of where Russian missiles are placed along the northern Siberian coast, and you can see it's a relatively short flight time distance over the top of the Arctic into Canada and into the United States of America. And so the Americans always recognize this. They've had a strategic base in Greenland since the end of the Second World War, and over time that's been built up with radar and radio systems. And I think their view is that Greenland is absolutely essential for their security. It's not properly integrated into what they call the NORAD, which is the North American Air Defense System, which is part of the which the Canadians and Americans run together. And so they see this as a vulnerability. Hence, I say the rather crude commentary of President Trump claiming, to take Greenland over as the 51st state. But I think in response to that, the Danes have recognised they need to up their game and say, we can provide the security you need, but you don't need to take over the Greenland itself. I think we certainly are preparing for conflict. Indeed, there are some analysts and indeed some of your colleagues who would say that we're already basically at war with Russia. But the type of war we're at the moment is very largely what this rather strange phrase, grey zone, or hybrid zone warfare we discussed earlier, the sabotage, cyber interference, attempted assassinations, and all those sorts of areas, subversion of elections, all that kind, and then limited amounts of kind of hot war fighting from there. And there's a recognition that I think that dealing with Putin, you're dealing with somebody who genuinely seems to want to change the geopolitical position of Russia, and that's something which we all feel cannot be allowed to happen. In terms of what it would then do to our economy, in terms of our politics and everything went with it. So yes, we are preparing for war. I think there are some countries that are more convinced of it than others. I think if you look at the eastern countries, you look at Poland, we discussed Poland, we also look at the Baltic countries, Finland and Sweden, who joined NATO last year, having been long time neutral countries. They all believe that Russia is capable of some kind of aggression against NATO countries, probably into the Baltics, within two to 3 years. Preparing in plain sight, I think is normal. I mean, that's what people do. That's what armies are for. That's the whole concept of deterrence. You show that you're capable of defending yourself. You show that you're capable of operating. And you hope that therefore persuades people that don't do this, because if you do, we have the response ready. At the moment, we've got the rhetoric. I'm not sure we've got the response ready yet.
But that's a war that could have been a third world war, and I don't think we're going to be there now. But that was heading to a third world war. And what a shame it is. What a shame it is. It doesn't affect the United States. We have, other than unless you end up in a world war over this thing, you could.
His concerns are that, I think particularly Putin backed into a corner, or Putin thinking this is his legacy moment, tries to push it for one stage further. But there's quite a long way before you get into a World War II like World War III, if that doesn't sound too completely illogical in terms of what you're talking about. I think, as I said, my expectation is we will receive a lot more of the kind of grey zone, hybrid zone warfare that we've already seen. I mean, we've had the director of MI5 saying that Russian military intelligence have gone feral in Europe. I mean, that's what that's very senior intelligence directors warning of what is happening. But President is not wrong. There is the danger that a miscalculation, an attempt by Putin to push it one stage too far leads to a response. I mean, if one of those drones that landed in Poland had landed and killed a lot of people, then the Poles would have responded, and we would probably have had to respond. And then very quickly you get into a cycle of escalation, which leads then to some kind of world war, or certainly sort of enhanced conflict. I mean, there are mechanisms, and there are also people who would argue restraint. And so, fighting, often direct fighting between proxies of Putin's regime in Syria against Turkish military have taken place, and that hasn't turned into a world war. But it's a high risk game, and there was a sort of element in places like Syria of what you might call plausible deniability. Yes, there were Russians fighting Turks, fighting Americans in some cases, but they weren't the Russian military. They were a mercenary group, so-called, who were fighting against them. So you didn't have quite the same feel as if it was a direct conflict between Russian forces and Western European forces.